Help my son. A desperate mother knocks on a stranger's truck in a blizzard. Then everything changed. A disabled single mother and her sick young son were forced out of their home in the middle of a brutal blizzard by ruthless debt collectors demanding payment for the debts her ex-husband had left behind. She barely made it partway down the block through the freezing storm before the boy's breathing became fast and painful. With no car, no phone signal, and the hospital miles away, panic closed in around her. Then, through the snow, she spotted a truck beneath a flickering streetlight. Desperate and out of options, she staggered forward, pounding on the window and begging the stranger inside to help save her son. She had no idea the man who opened that door would become the one person who could pull them back from the edge and change the course of their lives. Sit back and settle in because this is a story created just for you. Somewhere along the way, you might recognize a piece of life in it. Welcome to Memory Stories. The blizzard hit Elmwood like the heavens had finally lost patience with the town. Brooke Callahan woke to fists slamming against her front door, not knocking politely, but pounding with violence that ignored courtesy. She knew before opening her eyes. You did not spend years in Elmwood without learning to recognize trouble. "Connor," she said urgently, pushing herself upright in bed. Her left shoulder screamed in pain. Her right hip ached where the metal rod had been placed after the loading dock collapse at Harrow Manufacturing that had shattered vertebrae and ended her career as a warehouse supervisor in one terrible moment. But pain was something Brooke Callahan had learned to live with. She had no choice. "Connor, baby, wake up." Her young son stirred in the small bed across the room, his breath coming in soft, congested huffs. He had been fighting a chest cold for some time, the kind that rattled deep when he coughed, the kind that kept them both awake through the long, dark nights. Brooke had been giving him honey tea and keeping him close, but the prescription the community clinic had filled had run out recently. The clinic had only been able to dispense a partial course of antibiotics because their supply had been short, and Brooke had not had the money to get the remainder filled at the pharmacy. Her disability check was not due until later in the week. The pounding came again, harder. Then a voice, male, flat, with the specific coldness of a man who had learned to do unpleasant things without feeling them. "Open up, Brooke. We know you are in there." Her hands were already shaking as she reached for the worn cardigan draped over her bedside chair, the one her mother had sent from the South some Christmases ago, back when her mother still believed things were going to turn around. Brooke moved carefully the way her physical therapist had drilled into her. Always careful, always slow. Lead with the good side. She eased her weight to the left, gripped the nightstand until she was steady, then reached for the cane propped against the wall. She moved like a woman who had learned every wrong way to ignore pain and was now paying the accumulated debt. The disability payments covered rent and groceries and nothing else. The lawsuit against Harrow Manufacturing was still grinding through the courts. Her attorney called every few months to remind her that the new evidence about the inspection records was promising, that these things simply took time. In the meantime, Brooke had a modest income, a young son, and a rented house on Maple Avenue. That was the only home Connor had ever known. "1 minute," she called toward the door, keeping her voice level. "I am coming." She moved down the short hallway, her cane tapping against the cold linoleum. She had been keeping the baseboard heat low all week to save money, running the space heater exclusively in Connor's room. With his chest the way it was, she could not risk him getting colder. She opened the door to find 2 men on the narrow porch, snow swirling around them in the sharp wind. The one in front, she knew, Victor Kane, thick-necked with a face that might have been forgettable if something calculating had not settled permanently into its lines. He ran collections for the Maple Avenue crew, a predatory lending operation dressed in just enough paperwork to look legitimate. The man behind him she recognized from the neighborhood, tall, quiet, with the particular stillness of someone who waited to be told what to do and did it without questions. Victor pushed past her into the house without invitation. His boots dragged snow and mud across the floor she had mopped that morning. "It is late," Brooke said, keeping both hands on her cane. Something to hold, something to ground her. "What do you want, Victor? You know what this is about." He reached inside his jacket, pulled out a folded document. Your ex-husband Scott took out a loan some time ago, a significant amount. With the penalty rate and missed payment fees, that figure has grown. He has been gone for some time without a single payment. Debt does not disappear when a man decides to walk out on his family. Brooke kept her expression still. Scott Callahan had been her husband for some years and a source of escalating damage for most of them. He had been charming at first, then unreliable, then dishonest in ways that accumulated quietly until they could not be ignored. When Brooke had been injured in the warehouse accident some time ago, Scott had lasted only a short period of hospital visits and rehabilitation appointments before announcing that this was not the life he had signed up for. He had left one morning while Connor was at school, taking his clothes, his truck, and a portion of what was in their joint checking account. What he had not told her, what she had not discovered until Victor Kane first appeared at her door some time later, was that Scott had borrowed money from the Maple Avenue crew some time before he left, using the Maple Avenue address on the loan paperwork. He had taken the money, and Brooke still did not know what he had done with it. She suspected it had something to do with the woman in Dayton, whose name she had found in his phone the week before the accident, but that particular wound had long since closed over into scar tissue, and she did not spend time pressing on it. Scott's debt belongs to Scott, Brooke said carefully. I was not a co-signer on any loan agreement. I was not a party to any transaction with your organization. My name does not appear on that document. The address on the loan agreement is this address. Victor spread the document on her kitchen counter without being invited to. You have been living here benefiting from the financial relief his loan provided under the terms of our agreement that creates shared liability. It is all in the paperwork. That is not how loans work. It is how our loans work. Brooke looked at the document. She was not an attorney. She knew almost nothing about contract law. But she had grown up watching her father run a paramedic station in the South for many years. And he had taught her that official-looking things were designed to frighten people who did not know better, and that the first question to ask about any document was not whether it looked real, but whether it was. This one was designed to look real. She was nearly certain it was not. I cannot pay that amount. I receive a modest amount each month in disability payments. My son and I live on that. Then you have a problem. Victor folded the document, tucked it away, and looked around the small living room with the assessing gaze of a man calculating what things were worth. The second-hand couch, the folding table that served as a dining room, Connor's crayon drawings taped in a careful row along the lower half of the refrigerator, a garden, a dog, 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. We will take the sellable contents of the house as partial settlement, and you have a short period to vacate. Your landlord has been notified. He will cooperate with the process. This is my son's home. Your ex-husband should have thought about that before he borrowed money he could not repay and left you to deal with it. Victor's voice was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was indifferent. The indifference of a man who had done this enough times that the particulars of each family no longer registered as meaningful. Mama! Both of them turned. Connor stood in the hallway doorway in his blue rocket pajamas, clutching the stuffed dog he had named Buddy after a character in a book Brooke had read to him so many times the spine had separated. His face was flushed from the congestion, his eyes wide and glassy with the particular fear that children feel when strangers fill their house in the dark. Go back to your room, sweetheart. Brooke's voice was completely steady, the way fear can sometimes make a voice perfectly still. Everything is okay. Mama is just talking to some people. Victor glanced at Connor, then back at Brooke. Nothing in his expression shifted. A short period. We will return with the crew. If you are still here, your landlord will involve the authorities and it will be more unpleasant for everyone. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Do not call the police before you think carefully about whether that is useful. You know what kinds of conversations happen after phone calls like that. He looked once more toward the hallway. Get the child somewhere else if you are smart. These things get complicated when children are present. The door closed. Brooke stood alone in her kitchen and listened to boots on the porch steps, on the snow-packed front walk, and then silence reclaimed by wind. She sat down on the kitchen floor because her legs stopped working. Not from weakness, but from the particular physical response that comes when a body has been braced against something, and the something finally arrives. A loosening, a giving way. Every system held taut, releasing at once. "Mama!" Connor had crept down the hallway. He stood a short distance away. Buddy pressed against his chest, watching her on the floor with the careful attention he always gave her when she was hurting. He had learned at a young age to read her pain with a precision that broke her heart a little every time. "Are those men going to come back?" "Not tonight." Brooke reached out and he came to her, tucking himself carefully against her side the way he always did, gentle around her injuries, intuitive about which side was better, never needing to be told. "You do not need to worry about those men. Worrying about things is my job. Loving you is also my job. I am very good at both." Connor pressed his face against her shoulder. "Your jobs sound really hard." "They are," Brooke agreed. "They really are." She held him there on the kitchen floor, the space heater humming from his bedroom, the wind driving snow against the windows, and she went through every option she had and found every one of them closed. No money, no car. Her modified vehicle adapted for her disability had been at the shop for brake work recently, a bill she had not yet been able to pay. No phone signal. The East Side Tower had been unreliable all week under the weight of the storm. A child with a worsening chest cold, a fraudulent eviction notice and a short period and a warning not to call the police that she believed. She knew about the Maple Avenue crew the way everyone in her part of Elmwood knew about them. As background radiation, as the explanation for why certain neighbors had moved away suddenly, as the reason Mrs. Eddington on the corner had stopped opening her door to anyone she did not recognize. Several times in the past, people had called the police about the Maple Avenue crew. 2 of those people had found their cars vandalized within a short time. One had simply stopped being seen around the neighborhood. Brooke got Connor settled on the couch with a blanket. Then she went to the bedroom and got her emergency bag from the closet shelf. She had packed it some time ago, the night Victor had first appeared with the document, because something in her had understood then that this moment was coming and that she needed to be ready for it. She added Connor's nebulizer, his medications, the folder from the kitchen drawer that held every document that proved they existed and had rights, her disability paperwork, Connor's school records, the original lease agreement, Scott's name, and the details of his tenancy in the house, written in her own hand on a piece of notebook paper she had prepared specifically for the conversation she had known would eventually happen. She put on Connor's coat, then her own. She helped Connor into his boots. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder, picked up her cane, and took his hand. "Where are we going?" Connor asked. "To find somewhere warm," Brooke said. "Come on, baby." She did not wait for Victor to come back. She did not wait for morning. She walked out into the blizzard because staying felt more dangerous than going. And because she had learned some time ago, lying on a concrete floor waiting for the ambulance, that the only direction worth moving in was forward. She made it partway down the block. That was the honest measure of Brooke Callahan's circumstances on that stormy night. Partway down the block in a blizzard, her cane sliding on the ice under the snow. Connor's hand in hers, her hips sending signals that were not suggestions but directives. She stopped under a streetlight and looked at her son. His face was too red. His eyes were glassy in a way that had gone beyond cold and congestion into something else, something that landed in her chest with weight. His breathing was rapid and shallow. She counted without thinking about it, the way her father had taught her, and it was too fast. She pressed her hand to his forehead through her cold fingers and felt the heat radiating out. This was not just a chest cold anymore. She had seen this before, had watched a coworker's toddler deteriorate exactly this way during a company picnic some summers ago, had been the one to tell her coworker, "Do not wait, go now. This is not something you manage at home." She knew the difference between a sick child and a child whose body was losing a fight. It had been waging quietly for some time while everyone around him tried to manage it with honey tea and hope. "Mama," Connor said. His voice was small and careful, the voice he used when he was trying not to tell her how bad something felt. "My chest hurts when I breathe." I know, baby. She tightened her arm around him, feeling the heat of his fever through both their coats. I am going to find us help right now, I promise. She looked down the empty street. Every house was dark. Mrs. Eddington was elderly and had her own health troubles and no phone Brooke knew of. The community clinic was closed until later. The hospital was some distance away, and she had no car and no working phone. That was when she saw the truck. A dark blue pickup, well-maintained, parked along the far curb and half hidden by falling snow. The interior light was on. Through the fogged windshield she could make out a figure. Someone inside, present and warm and real. Every reasonable instinct she had said, "Do not approach a stranger's vehicle in the middle of the night." She had spent enough years being a woman alone to have those instincts well developed and well practiced. Connor made a sound, small, pained, the sound of a child trying not to frighten his mother, and Brooke looked at her son's face in the streetlight and walked toward the truck. She reached the driver's side, raised her hand. Her fingers were so cold she could not feel them properly. She knocked with her palm, left a mark in the condensation, knocked again harder. The man inside looked up. Through the snow-smeared glass she could see the startled expression, the immediate weariness of a person confronted with a stranger at this hour. The window came down a little. He was perhaps in his mid-30s. Dark hair, tired eyes, a face with something honest in its structure. Not soft, but straight. He wore a simple fleece jacket over a thermal shirt. Nothing about him suggested money. On the passenger seat beside him sat a medical bag, the well-used kind, with the red cross worn nearly invisible from years of handling, alongside a folder of patient charts. "Please," Brooke said, and her voice broke on that one word in a way that years of managing pain and fear and doing everything alone had never quite broken it before. "My son, he has a fever, and his breathing is wrong, and I have no way to get to the hospital. Please help us for one moment. Just one." She saw him process the situation, saw the natural weariness of a decent person confronted with desperation in the dark. Then the door opened. He was out in one motion, and his hands went to Connor with the practiced certainty of someone who had assessed emergencies without hesitating, supporting the boy's head and back, reading his breathing rate with a single, focused look. "Back seat now." His voice carried the particular calm of medical training. "I have got him." Brooke climbed in through the pain, her hip protesting every movement, biting down on the sound that wanted to come out. Connor was placed in her lap. The man was around the truck and behind the wheel before she had fully settled and the engine was running and the heat was blasting, and they were already moving. "How long has he been sick?" "For some time with the cold. Recently it spiked and he said his chest hurts when he breathes. Respiratory rate is high." "Okay." He drove with focused efficiency, eyes on the road. "Elmwood General is not far. I know a faster way. Keep him upright. Do not let him lie flat and talk to him. Keep him awake and talking. Are you a doctor?" "Physician assistant. I volunteer at the community health clinic on Oak Street a few evenings a week." He glanced in the rear view. "My name is Grant Whitaker. What is your name?" "Brooke Callahan." "His name is Connor." Grant's voice shifted, the clinical precision softening into something calibrated for a frightened child. "Okay, Connor. I know you feel awful, and I know it is late, but we are going to get you somewhere that will make your chest feel better very soon. Can you keep your eyes open for me?" Connor's response was barely a murmur. "Brooke," Grant's eyes found hers in the mirror. "Do not stop talking to him." Brooke cupped her son's face in her cold hands. "Hey, Connor James Callahan. Look at me right here. Look at Mama's eyes." His eyes opened, unfocused, but open. "Good boy. Tell me something. Tell me what Buddy had for breakfast this morning." "Peanut butter," Connor whispered. "Without the crust. Buddy hates the crust. Buddy has very high standards. What else does Buddy think about? Does Buddy like this weather?" "No." A small, real response. "Buddy does not like cold. Buddy likes summer." "Smart dog. What would Buddy rather be doing right now?" Brooke talked to her son for some time straight. She talked about Buddy's opinions on weather and food. She talked about the garden they were going to plant in spring, The cherry tomatoes Connor had been asking about since last fall. She talked about the book they had been reading before the cold got bad, about what she thought would happen in the next chapter. She talked without stopping, and Connor answered in small pieces, and Grant Whitaker drove through the blizzard with the efficient focus of someone who had learned not to waste energy on fear when action was available. Elmwood General's emergency entrance blazed against the dark. Grant pulled into the ambulance bay, threw the truck into park, and was out carrying Connor through the automatic doors before Brooke had fully gathered herself to follow. "Young male, respiratory distress," Grant told the triage nurse, his voice precise and direct. High fever, shallow rapid breathing, several days' history of upper respiratory infection with progression. Concerned about lower lobe involvement, the triage nurse was already calling. A doctor appeared soon, a woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and the focused calm of someone who had seen every variety of emergency and learned to read them quickly. She looked at Connor once and started moving. Treatment room, oxygen, IV access, the monitors climbing and stabilizing as the staff did what they knew how to do. When they asked Brooke to step out briefly, she stood in the hallway with her back against the wall and simply breathed in, out. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine beeped at regular intervals. Grant appeared beside her. He had not left. "He is going to be okay," Grant said, not a reassurance offered to comfort her. A conclusion drawn from evidence by someone who knew what the evidence meant. Soon after, the doctor came out. "Both lungs are involved. Pneumonia. We caught it early. His temperature was high on admission. We are bringing it down. Antibiotics are started. He is going to be completely fine." She looked at Brooke with the directness of a physician who understood that clarity was the kindest thing she could offer right now. "You got him here in time. Another short while and this would have been a very different conversation. You did exactly right." Brooke nodded. She did not trust her voice. The doctor looked at Grant, then back at Brooke. "Given the severity and the circumstances you arrived in, the hour, the weather, a child this ill, I need to ask about his home situation." "He has been well cared for," Grant said before Brooke could find words. "I volunteer at the Oak Street Community Clinic. I know this family through the clinic's East Side Outreach program. Brooke is an excellent mother managing a serious disability on very limited income. What happened tonight was the result of a criminal threat that forced them out of their home. It was not neglect." He met the doctor's eyes steadily. "I will put that in writing if it is useful." The doctor held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I will note the context in the report. Social services will follow up. It is standard procedure, but it sounds like the right people are already aware of the situation." After she left, Brooke looked at Grant. "You did not have to say that." "It was accurate," he said simply. "Accurate things should be said." They sat in plastic chairs in the corridor. A nurse brought Brooke a cup of water, then a blanket when she noticed Brooke's hands were still shaking. After a while, Grant went to the vending machines and returned with crackers, peanut butter packets, and 2 coffees, setting them on the seat between them without comment or ceremony. Brooke ate the crackers mechanically. Then she said, "Tell me why you were parked on Summerfield Street in the middle of the night in a blizzard." "I was coming back from a check-in on one of the clinic's East Side patients," Grant said. "An elderly woman, no transportation. Her daughter is in another city. Her name is Margaret Coyle, and she lives on the next block over from where I found you. She had a respiratory flare-up recently, and I had been checking on her every couple of days. I was on my way home when the storm got bad and I pulled over on Summerfield to wait out the worst of it." Brooke looked at him. "You volunteer in the middle of blizzards. When patients cannot get to the clinic, someone has to go to them." He said it the way people say things that are simply obvious to them. "It is not complicated." "It is, actually," Brooke said. "Most people do not do it. Then most people are leaving a gap that someone has to fill." He turned to look at her directly. "Tell me what happened tonight, all of it, from the beginning." Brooke told him. She told him about Scott, about some years of marriage that had deteriorated slowly and then quickly, about the accident and the short period Scott had lasted before deciding the life of a caregiver was not what he had intended for himself. She told him about discovering some time after Scott left that he had borrowed a large sum from the Maple Avenue crew some time before the accident, before the separation, apparently without ever mentioning it, using the Maple Avenue address on the loan documents. She told him about Victor appearing at her door some time after Scott's departure, about the fraudulent debt transfer document, about the short-period ultimatum and the warning not to call police. Grant listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I know a lawyer," he said. "His name is Thomas Reed. He runs the legal aid office on 4th Street. He has been building a case file on the Maple Avenue crew for some time, documenting the pattern, waiting for a victim willing to be the named plaintiff in a formal action." He looked at her. "I think you might be that person, if you are willing to fight." Brooke looked at her hands. "What does fighting cost?" "Danger," Grant said. He did not soften it. "If you go formal, they will push back. Victor Kane is not going to ignore a lawsuit. And Thomas has been tracking a man above Victor, a property investor named Harlan Briggs based out of Cleveland who uses the Maple Avenue crew to clear out properties he wants to develop. Your case could be the thread that unravels his entire operation." And he paused. "Which means you would not just be fighting for your house, you would be fighting for every family he has done this to." Brooke was quiet for a long moment. She thought about what it would mean to keep her head down, accept the loss, move somewhere else, and start over. She thought about Connor watching her do that. She thought about what she wanted her son to learn about what you did when someone took something from you that was not theirs to take. "Tell me more about Thomas Reed," she said. Grant told her everything he knew, and outside the blizzard kept falling, indifferent to the small, consequential conversation happening under the fluorescent lights of Elmwood General's emergency corridor. The hospital kept Connor for observation. The pneumonia responded to the IV antibiotics better than the attending had quite expected. She attributed it to how early they had caught it. And Brooke attributed it silently to Grant Whitaker driving through a blizzard to check on an elderly woman, because that was simply what he did. Everything connected. She was beginning to understand that Thomas Reed came to the hospital soon after. He was a compact man in his early 50s, wearing glasses and a sweater that had survived decades of hard use, carrying a briefcase that looked like it had been through courtroom battles. He shook Brooke's hand with both of his and sat across from her at the small rolling table in Connor's room, spreading the documents she had brought from her emergency bag between them. He spent some time going through everything: the original lease, Scott's tenancy, the note she had prepared in her own hand, the fraudulent Maple Avenue document. "This clause about address-based shared liability," Thomas said, tapping the paragraph precisely, "does not exist in Ohio law. It does not exist in any state's law. It was invented by someone who understood that most people receiving this document would not know that." He looked at her over his glasses. "They are counting entirely on you not knowing your rights. That is the complete business model. Scott's debt. Can they pursue it at all legally? Scott's debt belongs to Scott. If he surfaces, they may pursue him. You are not Scott. You never signed anything. You have no liability whatsoever for a single dollar of this." Thomas folded the document carefully. "What they did, coming to your home in the middle of the night, threatening you, issuing a short-period ultimatum, that is, criminal harassment, potentially extortion. And if we can demonstrate it as part of a deliberate pattern, which I already have substantial evidence that it is, we have the foundation for something considerably larger than your individual case." Grant mentioned a man named Harlan Briggs. Thomas nodded. "Briggs is a commercial real estate developer based in Cleveland, legitimate on paper. In practice, he has been using the Maple Avenue crew to force families out of their homes on Elmwood's east side. Fraudulent debt claims, intimidation, property seizure, and purchasing those properties through shell companies at a fraction of their actual value." He spread a property map across the rolling table. Several dots on the east side spread in a deliberate pattern toward the river. "There is a county development report from some time ago projecting a mixed-use riverfront corridor along the east side. High-end, residential, commercial, recreational. If that project moves forward, The properties Briggs has been acquiring could be worth many times what he paid for them. Brooke stared at the map. He is stealing a neighborhood to build condominiums. He has been stealing a neighborhood for some time. Your house was next. Thomas folded the map. I have been building this case file for some time. I have documented several families. What I have been missing is a named plaintiff, someone willing to go fully on the record and be the face of a legal action. He looked at her steadily. That is what I am asking you to consider becoming. I need to know Connor is protected while I become the face of it. That is the right question. Thomas glanced at Grant, who sat against the wall. Grant has arranged temporary housing, the Haven Inn on the south end of downtown, run by Marjorie and Edward Donnelly, ground floor room with no stairs on a month-to-month basis. So there is no timing pressure. That gives you stability while we build. And I have been in contact with an agent at the Ohio Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. Her name is Denise Hart, and she has been building an independent investigation into Briggs for some time. She has been waiting for the same thing I have been waiting for, a plaintiff willing to testify. Yes. Thomas paused. I will not minimize what I am asking. Once you go on record, the people working for Briggs will know there will be pressure, possibly significant pressure beyond what you have already experienced. He looked at her directly. But I believe we can win. And I believe that if we do not fight this now, more families will lose their homes after you. And more after that. Brooke looked at Connor asleep in the hospital bed, his breathing finally easy and regular, his small hand curled near his face. She thought about Scott, about all the ways his choices had followed her into a life he was no longer part of, about the accident that had not been her fault, the lawsuit that dragged on, the modest income that was never enough, about all the things she had not chosen. Then she thought about the things she could still choose. Yes, she said, I will do it. Whatever you need. The Haven Inn sat on the south end of Elmwood's downtown, a long, clean building owned for many years by Marjorie and Edward Donnelly. Marjorie was waiting in the lobby the morning Connor was discharged. She was in her late 60s, wide-shouldered with the handshake of someone who had worked hard her whole life and saw no reason to apologize for it. Ground floor, end of the hall, Marjorie said, taking Brooke's bag before she could object. Edward installed a grab bar in the bathroom last night after Grant called ahead. It took him little time with the drill and hardware we already had in the garage. She led them down the hallway. I know what you're going to say about payment, and I'm going to get there before you do. She unlocked the room. Simple, spotless, 2 beds, a kitchenette, afternoon light through clean windows. On the dresser, a tin of shortbread cookies. On Connor's nightstand, a juice box and a small stuffed bear with a note in careful handwriting. Welcome, Connor. Some years ago, Edward lost his job when the Elmwood mill closed, Marjorie said. We had kids in school and a short time before the bank moved on our mortgage. A woman I barely knew. She ran the flower shop on 5th Street. She has been gone for years now. She called our bank herself and arranged an extension. No reason except that she could, and she thought she should. She told me later that someone had helped her once and she was passing it forward. Marjorie looked at Brooke without sentiment or performance. That is what this is, not charity. What gets passed between people who understand that nobody gets through hard things alone. So, put your bag down and let that boy see his room. Connor was already past them examining the juice box. Grape, he reported to Buddy. Grape is the best one. I will make sure we keep it stocked, Marjorie said. After Marjorie left, Brooke sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her son making himself at home in a room that belonged to strangers in a building where a man she had never met had installed a grab bar in her bathroom before she arrived because a stranger had made a phone call. Grant sat in the chair by the window. How are you doing? Honestly, I do not know yet, Brooke said. Everything is still moving too fast for me to know. She looked at him. Why did you choose the Donnellys specifically? I have been sending families to them for some time, Grant said. People in crisis, people needing safe ground while something gets sorted out. Marjorie has never turned anyone away. He paused. She and Edward understand something that not everyone does, that helping is not a transaction. It does not require a reason beyond someone needing it. "And you?" Brooke asked. "Do you require a reason?" Grant looked out the window at the gray, cold street. "My sister had a daughter some years ago. She was a single mother working a grocery job that kept her just under the threshold for benefits. Her daughter was an infant when she got RSV serious in infants. My sister did not take her to the doctor for some time because she could not afford the copay and did not know the community clinic in her town would treat her for free." He paused. "Her daughter survived. She is older now and apparently argues about everything, which my sister says is exhausting and I think is wonderful." Brooke waited. "There was another family in that same ER waiting room," Grant continued, his voice quieter. "Same diagnosis, same delay, different outcome. Their baby did not come home." He turned from the window. "I had just sold my first company, a telehealth platform I had built with 2 partners out of a rented apartment in Dayton. I was young, and I had more money than I knew what to do with. And I was sitting in a hospital waiting room watching families who could not afford a copay lose everything. And the distance between those 2 things felt wrong, like a problem I was now obligated to help solve." Brooke looked at him carefully. "I went back into school for my PA certification," Grant continued. "People told me it made no sense. Why become a mid-level provider when I could just write checks to charities? But I had been sitting in that waiting room. I understood that the gap was not only money, it was information. It was the fact that people did not know what existed to help them. You cannot close that gap from a boardroom." He met her eyes. "I went into direct care because I kept thinking about how many of those outcomes were preventable if people just knew what was available to them." "That is why you volunteer at the clinic," Brooke said, "and make house calls." "Partly," Grant said. "Partly I stopped for you and Connor because you were standing in a blizzard holding a sick child. That part did not need a reason beyond being a person. The case built the way anything solid is built, one piece at a time, each piece checked before the next was added." Soon after Connor's discharge, Thomas arranged Brooke's first meeting with Agent Denise Hart from the Ohio Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. Hart drove down from Columbus and met them in the back room of Thomas's legal aid office on 4th Street, a narrow storefront whose gold letter sign was beginning to peel pleasantly at the edges. Hart was in her 40s, dressed in a dark blazer with the particular quality of stillness that comes from years of listening carefully to people tell her things she hoped she could do something about. "I have been building a case against Harlan Briggs for some time," she said without preamble. "What I have is the structure. What I need is testimony, specific documented harm that connects his company's directives to real families and real consequences." "That is me," Brooke said. "You are the strongest individual case I have encountered in this investigation," Hart said. "Your documentation is solid. The timeline is clear. Grant's clinic outreach records create independent, corroborating evidence. Connor's deteriorating condition over the time before the eviction attempt was documented, which means anyone surveilling your home, which Maple Avenue does routinely before a collection visit, would have had reason to know a seriously ill child was in that house." She paused. "Knowingly endangering a sick child to execute a fraudulent eviction that crosses from civil into criminal territory. What do you need from me?" "Everything. A formal deposition covering every interaction with Victor Kane and anyone else from Maple Avenue, full documentation of your ex-husband's loan, and the timeline of his departure and any knowledge you have of other families who were targeted." "I will get you other families," Thomas said. "I have several who have indicated willingness to come forward if there is a real legal structure supporting them." Hart looked at Brooke. "Once you go on record, Briggs's attorneys will work to discredit you. Maple Avenue will know. You should prepare for escalating pressure." She held Brooke's gaze. "I will not pretend that is not real, but I will tell you that we are prepared for it." Brooke looked at the property map. Several families on the east side of Elmwood. The neighborhood Harlan Briggs intended to hollow out and replace while the people who had lived there for generations disappeared. "I am in," Brooke said. "All of it." Other families came forward tentatively at first, 1 or 2 at a time, drawn by word of mouth through the east side of Elmwood, where people were beginning to say quietly that someone was actually fighting back and the sky had not yet fallen on her. Vernon Tate came first, a middle-aged man whose family's house on River Road had been seized through the same fraudulent debt transfer scheme. Then, Gloria Vance, whose elderly mother had been pressured into signing a quick claim deed she had not understood, losing the home she had owned for many years. Then Steve and Gloria Harmon, in their 60s, who had been living in their adult daughter's spare room for some time and still flinched at unexpected knocking. Douglas Crane came soon after, a man whose East Side auto repair shop had been effectively destroyed when Maple Avenue pressured his business lender into calling a loan early. He was still furious in a way that time had not diminished, and he put that fury directly into the most detailed financial documentation Hart had received from any victim. Evelyn Moss came the week after, elderly, composed with the specific dignity of someone who had decided long ago that how she carried herself was the one thing nobody could take. She had lost her home of many years after a representative told her she owed back taxes that did not exist on any county record. When Evelyn sat down across from Brooke in Thomas's back room, she was trembling with months of held-in rage. Brooke reached across and took her hand. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "They chose you deliberately. They look for people who are alone and do not know their rights and trust official-looking documents. That is not a reflection of your judgment. That is a description of what they do." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. "You really believe we can beat them?" "I think we are beating them already," Brooke said. "The question is just how completely." Connor adapted to the Haven Inn with the pragmatism of a young boy whose primary concerns were Buddy's needs, the reliable availability of grape juice, and whatever Grant Whitaker thought about questions involving science, animals, or the internal lives of plants. Grant came by the inn every evening after his day, which Brooke had gathered was not a single thing but many things, though she did not yet know the full shape of it. He brought food from the diner on 4th Street, sat at the small kitchenette table with Brooke going over the day's developments, and answered Connor's questions with complete seriousness regardless of their subject matter. "Grant," Connor said one evening, arranging crackers on the table with architectural precision. "Does Buddy need a doctor? What are Buddy's symptoms?" "He keeps falling off the bed." "That sounds structural rather than medical," Grant said. "We may need to consult Douglas." Connor nodded. Douglas Crane had by this point met Connor twice and been thoroughly adopted as a supplementary uncle by a process that involved no formal discussion and was apparently not optional. "Douglas fixes things," Connor confirmed. "What do you fix?" "People, mostly," Grant said. Connor considered this with the gravity he gave to important assessments. "That is a good thing to fix," he decided, and returned to his crackers. After Connor was asleep, Brooke and Grant sat at the small table with tea, and Brooke said, "Tell me something honestly. Not strategically, just honestly. How much of this is actually going to work?" "Thomas has a case file that Denise describes as the strongest she has seen in her investigation," Grant said. "The dangerous part is the window between now and when Briggs realizes the case is solid enough to move. That is when people like him tend to make decisions they regret. Meaning, go after the witnesses. Yes, you especially. You are the lead plaintiff. You are the most visible. And if they do, then we document it, add it to the charges, and use it to strengthen the case." A pause. "I know that is a cold answer." "It is an honest one," Brooke said. "I have had too many reassuring answers in the past. I prefer honest ones, even when they are cold." Grant nodded. "Then here is the honest version. This is going to be hard, and there are things I cannot guarantee. The safest thing you could do is take Connor somewhere else and let the case proceed without you." He held her eyes. "And you are not going to do that." "No," Brooke said, "I am not." "I know." He said it without judgment, without admiration, just acknowledgement. "So, we make it as safe as possible and keep moving." Some time after Brooke formally filed as lead plaintiff, her landlord called, apologetic, awkward, in the voice of a man doing something he knew was wrong because something worse had been implied or promised. He was terminating her lease effective immediately, citing a subletting clause Brooke had never invoked. Thomas filed a response within a short time. The judge extended the injunction's protection explicitly to cover retaliatory lease terminations, but Victor called the next morning. Brooke answered. "You have been talking to lawyers," Victor said. "You have been talking to the Attorney General's office. Stop now, and we renegotiate. You walk away with your lease intact and no further contact." "The injunction has been filed," Brooke said. "The deposition is scheduled. Injunctions get appealed. Lawyers lose interest. People who make themselves problems find that problems find them back." A pause. "You have a young son, Brooke?" "If you mention my son again," Brooke said, "I will include this call with those exact words in my formal testimony." She hung up. She called Thomas and Grant within minutes. Thomas said documented immediately and exact words, which she had already started doing. Grant was at the inn within the hour. They sat at the small table. After a while, Grant said, "How are you?" Not strategically, just how are you? "Angry," Brooke said immediately. "He said Connor's name to try to frighten me. He said it like Connor is leverage, like my son is a tool for managing my behavior." She looked at her hands. "I have been afraid for a long time since the accident. Since I woke up in a hospital bed, and the first thing I thought about was not the pain or what the doctor was saying, but who was picking Connor up from school because Scott was not going to." She looked up. "But this is different. This is someone deliberately using my child against me, and it makes me more angry than afraid." "Good," Grant said. "Use it. That is not what most people would say. Anger held right keeps you moving forward. It only becomes a problem when it turns inward." He paused. "Yours is pointed at exactly the right things." Some time after Brooke filed as lead plaintiff, Agent Hart called with two pieces of news that arrived together like weather. The first, the corporate case against Briggs, was nearing the threshold for charges. The second, someone in the county administrative office had been feeding information to Briggs's team. Briggs knew Brooke Callahan was the lead plaintiff. He knew the case was serious. Victor Kane left Elmwood some time ago. Hart said, "His phone is off. We do not know his location." A pause. "I am telling you this because I need you to take the security protocols seriously." Grant relayed the call to Thomas, then drove to the Haven Inn. Marjorie Donnelly appeared at the door some time after Grant arrived and handed Brooke a key. "Back entrance of the building," Marjorie said. "You do not have to use the front if you would rather not. Edward and I understand enough of what is happening to know what it means." She held Brooke's eyes. "You are safe here. Whatever comes." On an evening sometime later, Hart called Grant at a late hour. "Victor's phone pinged a tower in Elmwood recently. He is back." She paused. "I have moved my monitoring team to active status. The late-night window is the gap he would logically target if he is going to make a move. I am telling you because I know where you tend to be in the evenings." Grant finished his last task of the day and drove to the Haven Inn. He parked in the far corner of the back lot, backed in, and sat with his phone. Soon, the fire alarm in the first-floor corridor went off. Brooke was asleep. She came awake instantly. She was beside Connor's bed in seconds. "Coat and boots," Brooke said. "Bring Buddy." Connor, who had some quality that was either extraordinary trust in his mother or extraordinary steadiness for a young boy, moved without panicking. Brooke grabbed the emergency bag, always packed, always by the door. She was through the back corridor soon. Grant was at the service exit. "Take Connor," Brooke said. Grant took him, settling the boy securely against his side. They crossed the parking lot to Grant's truck in the far corner. Brooke moving as quickly as her hip and the icy ground allowed. Behind them, through the building's walls, voices raised, a crash. Then two sharp sounds that were not the fire alarm. Grant had Connor in the truck. Brooke got in. Grant backed out without headlights, took the service road exit, drove a short distance before pulling over and calling Hart. "Where are you?" Hart's voice was operational, the specific calm of someone managing a situation that had been prepared for. Grant gave the cross street. "Stay there. Do not move. We have people on scene." A pause. "You should know this was expected. We let him think the late window was soft. It was not." Hart called back soon after. Several in custody, including Kane. No guests at the inn were harmed. Marjorie Donnelly is physically fine and apparently describing her feelings about the evening in considerable detail. A brief pause. Kane is being charged with breaking and entering, criminal trespass, weapons possession, and attempted intimidation of a federal witness. He is not making bail tonight. We are filing charges against Briggs in the morning. After the call, Brooke sat in the quiet truck with her son warm beside her and felt something she could not quite name. Not relief exactly, because relief was too simple for what had just happened. Something more like the specific sensation of a door closing on something that had been trying to get through it for a very long time. "Grant," Connor said into the silence, "were those bad men?" "People made some very bad choices tonight," Grant said carefully. "And the people whose job it is to handle those choices are handling them right now." Connor considered this. Like how when someone spills something in the cafeteria, the custodian comes exactly like that. Connor nodded. "Then, can we get breakfast? I did not finish my dinner." Brooke made a sound that started somewhere else entirely and arrived as genuine laughter, involuntary, real, the kind that comes when relief is too large to stay inside. She put her face in her hand and laughed for some time, and when she looked up, Grant was watching her with an expression that was warm and quiet and entirely unguarded. "Yes," Brooke told her son, "we can absolutely get breakfast." Harlan Briggs was arrested at his estate outside Cleveland on a morning. The federal warrant carried multiple counts across the RICO indictment. Thomas called Brooke when the arrest happened. She was in the Haven Inn small breakfast room. Connor, beside her, eating scrambled eggs, explaining to Marjorie Donnelly why Buddy preferred them without salt. "It is done," Thomas said. Brooke held the phone. She looked at her son describing his stuffed dog's breakfast preferences to a woman in her late 60s who was listening with complete attention. "Okay," Brooke said. Not a dramatic word, just the right one. The trial of Harlan Briggs began on a Monday in late fall, months after his arrest. The federal courthouse in Cleveland was full with the specific fullness of people who had been waiting a long time for something to be said out loud. Brooke arrived with Thomas and Grant. Connor was spending the day with Marjorie Donnelly, who had taken a fierce and tender interest in his well-being, and who had announced without asking anyone's opinion that she was Connor's honorary grandmother and intended to act accordingly. On the 6th day of trial, the prosecutor called Brooke Callahan to the stand. Brooke walked to the stand with her cane. She had not asked anyone whether this was a problem. It was part of who she was. She sat in the witness chair and looked at the courtroom. Several families in the gallery, Thomas at the counsel table, Grant in the second row with his eyes steady when they found hers. "Miss Callahan," the prosecutor said, "please describe for the jury the events of that stormy night." Brooke described the night. She started with Connor's breathing. She described her ex-husband's loan taken out without her knowledge using the address of the home she shared with her son. She described Victor Kane and the fraudulent document and the short-period ultimatum delivered in the middle of the night to a disabled woman and a sick child. She described the distance she made in the blizzard before she stopped at the light in Grant's truck, knocking on a stranger's window because it was the only door left. "I did that because my son could not breathe and every other option was gone," Brooke said. "I had been made to have no options by the people who work for Harlan Briggs. Not by accident, by design. The design is this: create fraudulent debt, apply pressure, isolate the target until they have nowhere to turn and no one to call, then take what you came for. The documents are not the mechanism. The isolation is the mechanism." The courtroom was very still. "My son spent time in the hospital with pneumonia in both lungs," Brooke continued. "The doctor told me that a short while more and the conversation would have been different. I have thought about those hours every day since that night." She looked at the jury. "I am not here because what happened to me is the worst thing Harlan Briggs has done. I am here because I got lucky. I got lucky that a good man had parked his truck on the right street at the right time." Several other families did not get that particular luck. They lost everything, and they lost it because Harlan Briggs decided as a deliberate business decision that their homes were worth more to him than their safety was worth to him. She paused. I think that should be said plainly in front of people who can do something about it. So I am saying it. She was on the stand for some time. When she stepped down, Evelyn Moss squeezed her hand from the gallery. Vernon Tate nodded. The nod of someone who understood exactly what something had cost. Steve and Gloria Harmon were crying 2 rows back. The particular way people cry when someone finally says in public what they have only been able to say in the dark. The jury deliberated for some time. Guilty on all counts. Thomas found Brooke in the courthouse hallway and said those 4 words. She nodded once slowly and stood for a moment with her back against the wall. Then she asked to borrow Grant's phone and call Marjorie Donnelly's cell. He has been asking every short while, Marjorie said immediately. Here, Mama. Connor's voice round and complete and entirely himself. Did the bad people get in really big trouble? Yes, baby. Really big trouble. Like the biggest kind. A pause while Connor processed this with characteristic thoroughness. Does that mean we can go home? Brooke closed her eyes. The hallway sounds of the courthouse moved around her. Footsteps, voices, the ordinary machinery of a building full of people doing the slow work of justice. Yes, sweetheart, she said. We can go home. Sentencing came some time after the verdict. Harlan Briggs received years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. His assets were frozen pending restitution proceedings. The several properties seized through the scheme were ordered returned to their original owners or their families with financial restitution to follow. Victor Kane, for his cooperation after the arrest at the Haven Inn, received a shorter sentence. On a morning sometime after sentencing, Brooke and Connor came back to Maple Avenue. Thomas met them at the door with the deed paperwork and the key. A housing advocacy attorney had worked with her landlord and a legal aid housing fund to convert her lease into a rent-to-own arrangement. The house was not yet fully hers, but it was becoming hers legally and permanently, and no one could remove her from it through a fraudulent document ever again. Connor ran straight to the backyard. Brooke followed more slowly, her cane on the hard winter ground, and stood at the back door watching him survey the garden plot along the fence, the dead stalks of a last year's failed tomato attempt, everything brown and frostbitten and waiting for whatever came next. Rose again, Connor said, turning to face her, breath making small clouds in the cold air. Cherry tomatoes do well in Ohio is correct about that, Brooke said. Come spring, can we do other things too, not just tomatoes? What did you have in mind? Connor thought about it with the seriousness he brought to important decisions. Sunflowers, he said, because they follow the sun. Grant explained that it is heliotropism. He tried the word carefully. They know which direction to go. Brooke looked at her son. Yes, she said, we will plant sunflowers. Grant arrived an hour later with soup from the 4th Street Diner and a box of cherry tomato seed packets. Connor took immediate possession of the packets and began reading the backs with concentrated attention. Grant, Connor said, do tomatoes have feelings? Current science says no, but you are not completely sure. I am not 100% certain. Grant allowed. Then we should be nice to them anyway, Connor said, just in case. He turned back to the seed packets, satisfied with this resolution. Brooke watched from the kitchen doorway with a cup of tea warming her hands. Grant came in and poured himself a cup without asking. The easy familiarity of someone who had been in this kitchen enough times to know where things were kept. He leaned against the counter, and they stood together in the quiet for a moment. How does it feel? Grant asked. Like mine again, Brooke said. She wrapped both hands around her cup. My ex-husband took something from us when he walked out. Not the money, not the house situation he left behind. Something harder to name than that. Some sense of being chosen, of being worth staying for. She looked out the kitchen window at Connor, examining the frozen garden. I have been carrying that. I did not realize how much until things started getting better and I noticed the weight of what I had been holding. Grant was quiet for a moment. Scott leaving had nothing to do with your worth, he said. It had everything to do with his. Brooke looked at him. I know that now. She paused. It took a while. Most things that matter take a while. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that develops between people who have been through something real together and have stopped needing to fill every quiet. Then Grant said, I want to tell you something about who I actually am. Brooke looked at him. The first company I sold was a telehealth platform. I told you that. He sat down his cup. What I did not tell you is what came after. I built 2 more companies over the following years. A remote patient monitoring system and a medical data infrastructure firm. Both were acquired. The combined value of those transactions was substantial. The kitchen was very quiet. I am not a poor man who volunteers at a clinic, Grant said. I'm a very wealthy man who volunteers at a clinic. Those are different things, and you had a right to know which one before now. Brooke looked at him for a long moment. Why did you not tell me earlier? Because when you needed help that night, who I was financially was completely irrelevant to whether Connor needed oxygen. And afterward, he paused. I have spent a long time learning that money changes how people see you. I wanted you to see me first before you saw that. He held her gaze. I should have told you sooner. I am telling you now because what I am about to say next requires that you know. Brooke waited. The Harrow lawsuit settlement is going to give you real money, real stability, and what you have built with Thomas in the Resource Center. I have been watching you work for some time now, and I want to help you make it bigger, not by writing a check and walking away, by actually building it with you. He looked at her steadily. If you want that. Brooke looked at her son through the kitchen window. Connor was crouched over the frozen garden bed explaining something to Buddy with focused seriousness. How much bigger? She asked. As big as you want it to be, Grant said. That is your decision. I just want to fund the vision you already have. Brooke was quiet for a long time. She thought about the Resource Center phone ringing on its first morning, about Evelyn Moss trembling with months of held-in rage, about every family that had stood in Thomas's back room and told their story into a room that finally held someone who could do something about it. She thought about what she would have given some time ago for one phone number, one person who knew what existed and was willing to say so. All right, Brooke said. Let us talk about what bigger looks like. The Callahan Whitaker Community Foundation was incorporated on a morning in spring in Thomas Reed's Legal Aid Building on 4th Street, with Brooke as executive director and Grant as founding board chair. Brooke had argued with the name for some time. Grant had simply said, "You built the vision. Your name belongs on it." She had not argued after that. The foundation launched with 3 programs simultaneously. The first was an expansion of the Resource Center model. Not one office on 4th Street, but a statewide network of information hubs. Each one embedded in an existing community organization staffed by trained navigators who knew exactly what benefits, legal protections, and free services existed in their county and how to connect people to them. The information gap Grant had named some time ago between what existed to help people and what people knew existed was the thing Brooke intended to close. The second program was the Disability Stability Fund, a direct assistance grant for people with disabilities who fell between the gaps of existing benefit programs, not loans, not charity with conditions attached. Grants with a single requirement that recipients complete a short session with a benefits navigator to understand every other resource they were entitled to. Brooke had designed the requirement herself because she remembered with precision the things she had not known, and the difference knowing them would have made. A modest amount each month, she told the Foundation's first staff meeting. That is what I have. That is what a lot of people have, and there are programs, housing supplements, medication assistance, food benefits, legal aid that could have added effective income if I had known they existed. I did not know. Nobody told me. We are going to be the people who tell them. The third program was the Haven Network, a partnership with small independent hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts across Ohio. Following the model Marjorie and Edward Donnelly had demonstrated on a small scale, temporary housing. No judgment, no impossible requirements for families in crisis who needed safe ground while something got sorted out. Marjorie Donnelly, who had been consulted extensively on the design, had sat across from Brooke in the planning meeting and said, "You made it formal. Good. Formal means it keeps going after you and I are gone. That is exactly what I intend." Brooke said, Grant funded the foundation's first years of operating costs entirely. He was specific about this. He would fund operations. He would not control direction. He sat on the board and voted his share and said what he thought when asked and deferred to Brooke on everything else. "You know what you are doing," he said simply. "I know how to fund what people who know what they are doing are doing. Those are different skills, and they should stay in their lanes." Thomas, who sat on the board as legal counsel, noted privately to the receptionist that this was the most functional board dynamic he had encountered in many years of non-profit legal work. The receptionist said she was not surprised. Some time after the foundation launched, Brooke went to Columbus. She went with Agent Hart, who had transitioned out of the Attorney General's office to direct a new state-level consumer protection initiative, and with a coalition of several advocacy organizations that had been quietly coordinating for some time on the specific legislative package Brooke was about to testify in favor of. The package had 3 components. The first was mandatory plain-language disclosure requirements for any lender operating outside standard banking regulation. The second was a private right of action for victims of fraudulent debt transfer schemes. The same fraud that had been used against several families in Elmwood and which Hart's research showed had been used against thousands more across the state. The third was a dedicated state fund to provide emergency legal representation to people facing fraudulent eviction, so that the absence of a Thomas Reed in their particular town was no longer a determining factor in whether they survived. Brooke testified for some time before the Senate Banking and Insurance Committee. She told the story of that stormy night. She told it plainly and without performance. Then she said, "I was lucky. I had a neighbor who knew a lawyer. I had a lawyer who had been building a case file for some time. I had an investigator who had been building a parallel file for some time. I had strangers who installed grab bars in bathrooms before I arrived and stocked grape juice because a young boy needed it. I had a man who parked his truck on the right street on the right night." She looked at the committee. The families who lost their homes did not have those things. Not because those things do not exist, but because nobody told them. And nobody told them because there was no system for telling them. She paused. This legislation creates part of that system. It will not fix everything, but it will mean that the next family who receives a fraudulent debt notice in the middle of the night has somewhere to call in the morning. That is not a small thing. That is the difference between losing your home and keeping it. The package passed committee some time later. It cleared both chambers and was signed into law on an afternoon in summer. Brooke was in the signing room. Grant was beside her. Connor was with Marjorie Donnelly, who had taken the day off and driven to Columbus specifically to watch the signing on the live stream with him. When the governor set down the pen, Hart turned to Brooke and said, "You know, this is just the beginning." "I know," Brooke said. "That is the point." On a Saturday in spring, Brooke planted tomatoes. Connor helped. So did Grant, who had established a permanent presence on Maple Avenue in a way that had become natural without either of them making a formal announcement about it, an arrangement that suited them both, figuring itself out at its own pace. So did Douglas Crane, who had built raised beds from salvaged wood, and who brought his tools in the truck from his reopened East Side shop. So did Evelyn Moss, who arrived with a pie and a pair of gardening gloves and had no intention of leaving before the pie was finished. The raised beds ran along the fence in 3 even rows, level and straight. Connor moved between them with his child-sized trowel, working with the gravity he brought to things that mattered. Buddy sat on the porch railing, facing the garden, positioned there by Connor specifically so he could observe the proceedings. Brooke knelt in the warm soil, Grant's hand briefly at her elbow until she was down and stable, automatic and unhurried, and pressed the first seeds into the earth. "Do you want to say something to them?" Connor asked from a short distance down the row. "You mean to the seeds? You told me we tell them it is safe to grow." Brooke looked at the small furrow and the dark soil. She thought about that stormy night, about the specific cold of that night. the weight of Connor in her arms, the distance she had made before the world had narrowed down to a single option, a light in a stranger's truck. She thought about the Foundation's first monthly report. Several families served. Several fraudulent debt notices identified and challenged. Several emergency housing placements through the Haven network. Several benefits navigations completed. Numbers that were also people who had somewhere to call in the morning now. "It is safe to grow," she said to the seeds, to the garden, to whoever needed to hear it. "We are going to take care of you. You can grow as much as you want." Connor nodded satisfied. He turned to his section. "Hi," he said to his seeds in the small and earnest voice he reserved for things that mattered. "Your name is Buddy 2. You are going to do great. Do not tell Buddy 1. Evelyn Moss laughed from the porch steps, a genuine, full laugh that had been coming more easily these past months. Douglas Crane shook his head and smiled. Grant, crouched beside Brooke with soil on his hands, met her eyes with an expression that was warm and uncomplicated and entirely real. "He is extraordinary," Grant said quietly. "He has been doing this the whole time," Brooke said. "Being exactly himself, no matter what was happening around him. He taught me something. He did not know he was doing it, but he did." "What did he teach you?" "That being afraid does not mean you are not okay. That you can be scared and still be completely yourself." She looked at the seed in her fingers before pressing it down. "I spent a long time after the accident not quite being myself, managing, coping, making do. I confused surviving with living." She looked up at Grant. "Connor never did that. He was always just fully there. Even in the hospital, even at the inn, completely himself, completely present, a young boy, and he never lost himself." "He had a good example," Grant said. "He had a better instinct than I did." Thomas Reed arrived at noon with sandwiches and a folder. He brought it out of habit more than necessity. "The Harrow case," he said to Brooke between bites. "Their legal team called recently. They want to settle the amended complaint with the inspection records documenting that the loading dock was flagged as structurally substandard some time before your accident has changed their internal assessment significantly." He looked at her over his glasses. "The number they have offered is not what we will accept, but the fact that they are offering tells us everything we need to know about how they see their exposure." Brooke set down her sandwich. "You are going to have real stability," Thomas said. "For you and Connor, not this month. These processes take time, but the trajectory is clear, and it is pointing in one direction." Brooke sat with this with the time of careful calculation. What she could afford, what she could not, what she had to go without, and what Connor absolutely could not. With the years of managing the gap between what was needed and what was available, she had learned in those years to keep her expectations calibrated to what seemed possible, so that disappointment stayed manageable. It was a survival strategy, and like all survival strategies, it had costs she had not fully recognized until she started putting it down. "Thank you," she said to Thomas. Connor, who had eaten half his sandwich and given the other half to Douglas on the grounds that Douglas needed more fuel for building things, came over and settled himself between Brooke and Grant on the porch step. He was dirty from the garden, a stripe of soil across one cheek, entirely unbothered by this. "Grant," he said, "can we grow tomatoes inside in winter with special lights?" "You can," Grant said. "It is called a grow setup. We would need some equipment." "Douglas can build the equipment." "I will build the equipment," Douglas said from the garden, apparently having followed the entire conversation while ostensibly examining the raised beds. Connor turned to Grant. "See, it is easy. Douglas builds things. You know things. Grandma Evelyn brings food. Mama fights bad guys. Thomas does the papers." He thought for a moment. "I take care of Buddy, and I grow things, and I make sure everyone is happy." A pause for reflection. "That is 3 jobs. I work very hard." "You do," Brooke agreed. Seriously. "What is Grant's job?" Connor asked. "Besides knowing things." Connor looked at Grant with the direct assessment of a child who had decided something and wanted confirmation. "He stays," Connor said, as if this were self-evident. "That is his job. He stays." Grant looked at Brooke. Brooke looked at Grant. "Yes," Grant said. "That is my job." Connor nodded, satisfied, and went back to his crackers. On the 4th of July, Elmwood held a celebration in Riverside Park. The city had installed new playground equipment the month before, funded in part by a donation from the Foundation's community fund that had grown substantially after the Briggs trial made regional news. The East Side Neighborhood Association, which had not held a meeting in some time, had reorganized with many members and a waiting list. These were not endings. Brooke understood that with complete clarity. The underlying conditions that created vulnerability, poverty, the long aftermath of industrial decline, the 1,000 ways systems failed the people most dependent on them were not solved by one conviction or one foundation or one piece of legislation. They were not going to be solved this year or perhaps in her lifetime. But you worked with what you had in the space you occupied with the people beside you. You closed the information gap where you could reach it. You made sure the next family in crisis had somewhere to call. You planted what you could and trusted the growing to the season. Brooke sat at a picnic table with Connor, watching him eat a hot dog with the focused pleasure of a child who had decided hot dogs were among life's great achievements. Grant sat beside her. Evelyn Moss was across the table comparing notes with Gloria Vance on their respective rose plantings. Douglas Crane had taken charge of the grill with the authority of a man who felt that grills required competent management and was prepared to provide it. Thomas Reed sat on the grass nearby, his briefcase for once left in the car. Grant's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then held it toward Brooke. A text from Hart. Briggs's appeal denied. No procedural basis. Full sentence. Thought you would want to know before the holiday weekend. Brooke read it twice. Passed the phone back without speaking. "Good news," Thomas called from the grass. "Briggs's appeal was denied," Brooke said. "He is serving the full sentence." Thomas nodded once. The nod of a man for whom justice, when it actually arrived, was satisfying in a specific and quiet way. Not triumphant, just right. Brooke set the phone down on the picnic table in a square of late-afternoon sun that had turned the surface warm. She looked at the park around her, at Evelyn Moss laughing at something Gloria Vance had said, at Douglas Crane presiding over the grill with dignified authority, at Thomas Reed lying back on the grass, his face turned up to the sky doing something that looked remarkably like resting, at Connor, who had finished his hot dog and was now explaining to Grant in considerable detail why sunflowers were the best flower, citing their heliotropism, their height, and their general attitude toward life as evidence. She thought about that stormy night, about the specific texture of that night, the cold, the weight of Connor in her arms, the distance that was as far as she could go, about the moment she had looked at her son's face in the streetlight and understood with absolute clarity that she would do anything, that there was no version of that night in which she stopped moving. She thought about the Foundation's first-year targets, many families served, coverage expanded to several counties. The Haven Network, active in many partner locations across Ohio. The Disability Stability Fund having made direct grants to many people. 1 year, that was what 1 year of a real structure could do. She thought about what many years could do. None of it had been inevitable. Any one of those threads cut at any point and the outcome was different. She had been lucky and she had been willing, and those two things together had been enough. She was beginning to understand that this was how most things worked. Luck meeting willingness. Readiness meeting moment. A woman in a blizzard and a truck parked in the right place at the right time. And then, after that, the choice about what to do with having survived. "Hey," Grant said quietly beside her, not asking anything, just making sure she was there. "Hey," Brooke said. Connor came back from wherever he had wandered, flushed from running, and climbed into Brooke's lap with the complete confidence of a child who had always been certain of his welcome. He smelled like summer and grass and the sunscreen she had applied that morning over his protests. "Best day," he announced. "Best day," Brooke agreed. He leaned back against her, watching the playground, watching the park, watching the ordinary, beautiful fact of people in a place they were no longer afraid of. After a while, he said to no one in particular, "The tomatoes are growing. I checked yesterday. They are almost as tall as my knee." "They are doing very well," Grant said. "I told them to," Connor said simply. "I told them it was safe." Brooke pressed her face against the top of her son's head, in his hair that smelled like sunshine, and felt the specific peace that comes not from the absence of hard things, but from knowing fully, bodily, without needing to think about it, that you are not facing them alone. The sunflower seeds they had ordered were waiting at home in a paper bag on the kitchen counter. Next weekend, they would plant them along the south fence where the light was best. By late summer, they would be taller than Connor, turning their heavy heads through the day to follow the sun across the sky. Not because anyone told them to, not because it required effort or decision, but because that was simply what they did, because they knew which direction the light was in, and they went toward it. Brooke Callahan held her son in the July heat and watched her friends in the park and felt the future opening out in front of her like a field she had not known was there, wide and real and entirely worth walking into. There was still so much to do. There would always be so much to do. The foundation phone would ring on Monday morning and the work would continue, and the gap between what existed and what people knew existed would close one family at a time. Slowly, the only way anything real ever closed. But right now, there was this. A park in summer, a child in her arms, a man beside her who had made staying his practice and his promise, and all around them a community learning slowly and imperfectly, and together how to grow back toward the light. The afternoon stretched long and golden over Elmwood. Brooke lifted her face to it and let it in. Sometimes a life changes not with a grand miracle, but with a single moment of kindness. A door opened, a hand extended, a stranger who chose to care. That night in the storm saved more than one child. It reminded two lives that compassion travels in both directions, quietly reshaping the world. The smallest choice to help can echo far beyond the moment we make it. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever experienced a moment when one simple act changed everything? In the heart of a raging blizzard in Elmwood, Ohio, Brooke Callahan stood frozen on a snow-covered street. Her young son, Connor, clutched tight against her chest as his labored breathing cut through the wind like a knife. A disabled, single mother with nothing left. No car, no phone signal, no safe place to turn. She pounded on the window of a stranger's truck out of pure desperation. That single knock changed everything. Grant Whitaker, a physician assistant on his way home, could have driven on. Instead, he opened the door, assessed the situation with calm expertise, and drove them straight to safety. What started as one man's quiet act of compassion didn't just save Connor's life from pneumonia. It ignited a chain reaction that dismantled a predatory debt scheme, returned stolen homes to families, and built a statewide foundation to close the information gap for those who needed help most. Brooke went from fighting alone to leading the Callahan-Whitaker Community Foundation, planting sunflowers in her garden with her son and the man who chose to stay. This story reminds us that the smallest choice to care can ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. In a world that often feels cold and indifferent, one hand extended in the dark can restore hope, spark justice, and prove that no one has to face hardship alone. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the quiet force that rebuilds lives, neighborhoods, and futures. If this tale touched something deep inside you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the best of the human spirit. In the comments, tell us, have you ever experienced a moment when one simple act of kindness changed everything? We read every single one. See you in the next story.